Okay, let's jump right in. Today we're doing a deep dive into a piece of history that, honestly, often gets skipped over.
Yeah, the Spanish period in Jamaica.
Exactly, 161 years for the first real settlement in 1508, right up until the English finally took full control around 1660.
And it's quite a story. It's really about big hopes meeting a kind of harsh reality. Spain thought gold,
Hmm.
but they got, well, something very different.
A struggling frontier outpost, basically, but one that shaped everything that came after, even if the British sugar era gets all of the attention later on.
Absolutely. And it's important right from the start to get a sense of who is actually there.
Good point. The sources remind us Jamaica wasn't just Spanish and Taíno. You had the indigenous Tainos, obviously, the Spanish settlers, but also Africans brought in early on, and even Sephardic Jews arriving with the Spanish.
It was complex from the get-go, a real mix even before the British showed up. Understanding that diversity is, well, it's key.
So the story often starts with Columbus, but his connection is a bit sporadic, isn't it?
Very much so. He first saw the island May 3rd, 1494. Didn't even land.
Sailed right past. Only stopped 2 days later, May 5th, for basics water and wood, like a quick pit stop.
Pretty much. Then, fast forward 9 years, he's back. But not by choice.
Right. Shipwrecked. Stranded for a whole year.
A whole year stuck there. And that's when he wrote that long letter to the Queen of Spain describing everything. Quite the contrast, his visits.
4 days versus 12 months. But the actual permanent settlement, the colonization part, that didn't kick off until 1508.
And significantly, that was 2 years after Columbus had died.
So his son, Diego Columbus, then governor of the Indies, he appointed Juan de Esquivel as the first lieutenant governor.
Esquivel lands with just 80 citizens. And their families, of course.
80 families.
Yeah.
That's not a huge invasion force, is it?
No, it tells you something about the scale right away. This wasn't Cortez landing in Mexico. It was more tentative, exploratory.
And Esquivel's first try at setting up a capital really kind of sets the tone for this whole Spanish era.
Definitely. He picked a spot near St. Anne's Bay, close to a big Taíno village called Maima, and he named it Sevilla la Nueva, New Seville.
Sounds hopeful. Standard colonial naming practice.
Maybe a bit too standard. He quickly tried to spice it up, renamed it Sevilla d'Oro.
Golden Seville. Okay, now that's laying the ambition bare, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit desperate maybe, because the crucial point, the central theme of this whole period really is...
It's gold.
Exactly. No significant gold was ever found. And because of that, the Spanish crown basically lost interest pretty fast. Jamaica became secondary.
All focus shifted to the mainland where the treasure actually was.
Right. Peru, Mexico. That's where the action was.
So this initial disappointment, the lack of gold, it forces them to physically move the capital, not just once, but twice.
That first site, Sevilla d'Oro, or La Nueva, was abandoned. In 1518, they moved closer to the sea, simplified the name back to just Sevilla.
Okay, attempt number 2. Did this one fare any better?
Well, for a little while, yeah. The sources mention Governor Francisco de Garay. Under him, around 1525, the town actually had a bit of life.
What did it have?
It had a stone fortress. Garay built himself a castle. Apparently there was an artist's workshop.
An artist's workshop. Interesting detail.
And a sugar factory. Plus, they started building a church, the Peter Martyr Church.
Ah, but the sources say that church was never finished, right?
Never finished. Which is, when you think about it, quite symbolic.
An unfinished church next to a working sugar factory.
Yeah.
That says a lot about where the real priorities ended up.
It really does. The grand spiritual mission, the quest for instant riches, they kind of faded, replaced by the harder reality of, well, agriculture, making a living off the land.
And that shift leads directly to the final move for the capital in 1534.
Correct. They moved inland this time to Villa de la Vega.
Which means town of the plain. We know it today as Spanish Town.
And the reason for this move wasn't about gold or even the best port. It was purely practical.
Farming land.
Exactly. Villa de la Vega was chosen because it was surrounded by good, defensible farmland. And critically, this is where the Spanish properly introduced sugarcane.
The crop that would eventually dominate the island's economy under the British.
The very same. So this less glamorous spot chosen for agriculture actually stuck. It stayed the capital through the rest of Spanish rule and for centuries under the British, right up until 1872.
Wow, over 300 years. So they finally settled down in the plains. But it still begs the question, if Spain wanted El Dorado, why stick with this island that's just, raising cattle and growing provisions? Why did it stay so peripheral?
It just couldn't compete. economically with the mainland treasures. So Jamaica found its role, its niche, as a supply post.
A supply post. For what?
For the Spanish armies fighting on the American mainland, think of it like a crucial gas station and grocery store for the conquests happening elsewhere. Its value was logistical, not about inherent wealth.
So forget the conquistador glamour. Life here was about ranching, farming, keeping things running.
Right. Absolutely. That's why the sources call it a life of living on the frontier. It was tough. Basic industries, ranching, growing food for themselves and passing ships, cattle rearing, and yes, supported by enslaved labor, which was part of the system from early on.
Exporting hides, growing food.
Yeah.
That was the economy.
Pretty much. And because it was a frontier and Spain was far away and often neglectful,
They started trading with whoever showed up.
you got it. Some illegal, or at least officially frowned upon, trade with the Dutch, the French, even the English. Needs must. You know, if Spain wasn't providing, they'd get goods elsewhere.
Which probably didn't help build loyalty to the Spanish crown either.
Not at all. It fostered a kind of pragmatic independence.
And the population numbers really show how small scale this whole operation was.
Tiny. Like we said, maybe 2,500 Spanish settlers plus the enslaved population by the time the English invade in 1655. Towns were just small settlements, mostly on the south coast. It was poor, underdeveloped.
And vulnerable.
Yeah.
The sources mention internal problems too.
Definitely decaying from within in those last decades. Lack of real support from Spain, constant bickering, especially with the church authorities on the island.
Always a source of drama.
Always. And pirate attacks. Frequent raids shipping away at them. The colony was ripe for the picking, in a way.
And picked it was in 1655. But the way it happened is, well, the numbers are staggering.
They really are. The English invasion force was huge, about 8,000 soldiers.
8,000. And facing them.
A local Spanish-Jamaican militia. Maybe 1,500 men?
1,500, that's more than 5-to-1 odds.
And importantly, that militia wasn't just Spanish settlers. The sources specify it included white, black, and colored men, reflecting that mixed frontier society we talked about.
So with those numbers, you'd think it would be over in days, right?
Yeah.
A quick, decisive blow.
That's what the English expected. And they did establish a beachhead pretty easily, but then resistance.
It wasn't quick at all.
No, it turned into this prolonged 5-year guerrilla war. The Spanish weren't fully kicked out until April 1660.
5 years. How did 1,500 guys hold out against 8,000 for 5 years? That doesn't make sense on paper.
It doesn't if you only think about the official Spanish forces. The key factor was local alliances. The Spanish governor, Cristobal Arnaldo
Isasi, right?
he got absolutely crucial help from the Maroons.
Ah, the Maroons. Okay, explain who they were for anyone unfamiliar.
So the Maroons were communities of formerly enslaved people who had escaped the plantations and settlements and formed their own autonomous groups, mainly in the really rugged, mountainous interior of Jamaica. They knew the land like nobody else.
Independent communities, masters of the terrain.
And masters of guerrilla warfare. Isasi allied with them, and their resistance was incredibly effective. They kept the English bogged down for years.
So the Spanish resistance depended heavily on these non-Spanish independent Maroon fighters.
Critically so. And the final English victory, when it came, wasn't just about military might. It came when a key faction of the Maroons switched sides.
They deserted the Spanish and joined the English.
Exactly. That shift in allegiance seems to have been the tipping point. So the war was ultimately decided not just by European armies, but by the choices made by these powerful local actors, the Maroons.
Fascinating. So 1660, the Spanish are finally gone after 161 years. But you can't just erase that much history, can you? Even if the physical ruins aren't that prominent.
No, the biggest legacy, the most obvious one today, is in the names on the map.
The place names.
Right.
The English kept so many of them, or just adapted them.
It's quite striking. You mentioned Esquivel, the first governor. The area of his failed first settlement, Sevilla la Nueva, is near what's now Old Harbor Bay.
Okay, what else?
Oristan became Bluefields. Mantarius, that one's famous.
Montego Bay from Mantarius, meaning lard or butter, apparently from the pig hunting days.
That's the story, yeah. Las Correras, meaning the waterfalls.
Ocho Rios, which is funny because it means 8 rivers, but there aren't 8 rivers there. A mistranslation or adaptation, perhaps?
Possibly. Porto Santa Maria is now Port Maria. Melilla is Anado Bay. Porto Anton is Port Antonio. The list goes on.
So the English basically inherited the Spanish map and just tweaked the labels.
It shows that the basic layout, the places people lived and traveled between, were already set down during those 161 Spanish years. The infrastructure, however basic, was there.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive into Spanish Jamaica?
For me, it's a story arc defined by initial disappointment, that failure to find gold. Then adaptation and mobility, shuffling the capital 3 times until they found a spot that worked for agriculture.
Right, and ultimately settling into this role as a peripheral, strategically important but economically poor supply post, a frontier existence.
Right. And the end wasn't a simple conquest, but this complex guerrilla war where local alliances, especially with the Maroons, were absolutely decisive. It's a grittier, more complex story than just Spain failed, Britain succeeded.
It really sets the stage differently, thinking about it that way. The British didn't arrive on a blank slate,
Not at all. They inherited a landscape, a basic infrastructure, and crucially, a complex mix of peoples with their own histories and allegiances already in play.
which leads us to a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. We talked about how that final Spanish capital, Villa de la Vega Spanish town, was chosen back in 1534 specifically for its farming land, leading to the introduction of sugarcane.
The pragmatic choice, driven by the lack of gold.
Exactly. So, considering that failure to find the hoped-for riches, how much did that simple, almost mundane reality of agriculture, finding good soil, fundamentally shape not just the Spanish experience, but the entire future layout and the eventual economic powerhouse of the island for centuries after the Spanish left?
It makes you think, doesn't it? It wasn't the glittering prize they sought, but the fertile plains that truly defined Jamaica's path. Maybe the real treasure was the soil all along.